Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast. Wait, before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you for tuning into this episode of the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast, and just ask you to please hit the like button below, or click the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or follow this podcast if you are listening. That really helps the show out. But also, if you want to help us further, then join our Patreon. We have an awesome community that is growing there. Or if you want to make a one-time donation, we are a nonprofit foundation, so head to our website. Both the Patreon and the website will be linked down below. But without further ado, back to the episode. I'm your host, Bradon Coy, and I'm super stoked to be back with you all this week. And this week, we're chatting with Dr. Jonathan Larson. Dr. Larson is a professor at the University of Kentucky at the Department of Entomology, and he is also the host of another entomology-focused podcast called the Arthro-Pod. And thanks so much for joining us, Jonathan. Welcome to the show.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead and say hello to the people for me.
Hello to the people. I'm very excited to join you, Brandon. This is really cool. I have talked about your podcast several times. I feature your logo in a lecture I give on podcasting, and I've talked about your show, and so I'm quite honored to meet you over the airwaves and to chat with you today.
Yeah, I'm super stoked about this, and it's funny because I think you were, I would say, the first entomology-focused podcast. Because when did you start that?
So I started Arthro-Pod alone in 2014 when I first started at the University of Nebraska. I used to be an extension educator out there, and when I was hired, I was very much the token millennial, and they sort of said to me, "Hey, why don't you do something with the internet?" And I had some friends that we had done some podcasting with, and I had a bunch of the equipment, and so I put it together. I will say I've done some spelunking on the history of entomology podcasts, and we have several forebears in our
Really?
field, Brandon. Yeah, there was a show that came out right when podcasting was taking off from Michigan State that was called Bug Bites. Tom Turpin from Purdue followed shortly thereafter. He had a show that ran as like 5-minute segments. He did that for a long time. He was probably the longest tenured insect podcaster. But yes, we have bragged on Arthro-Pod before that we are the oldest insect-themed podcast on the airwaves currently running. So I don't know if that puts us in like Sesame Street territory, but we have been around since 2014.
Oh, that's awesome. And I only started in 2019 or 2018. So, and then there's a bunch of other ones popping up now. So it's a really exciting thing. Because when I started, I only knew of the Arthropod,
Nice.
and I started, and then in the last like 1.5 to 2 years, I've noticed a bunch of other ones popping up. So it's a really exciting thing that seems to be happening. And so that's kind of what we're talking about today is science education. What is why is this so exciting to you, and what's your passion with science communication?
So I would say my passion for science communication comes from my role as an extension entomologist. So we'll probably unpack what extension is and what that means over the course of the episode. But extension is kind of the OG original version of Sci-Com that we had in this country, in the United States. Extension was founded federally, sort of formally, in 1914 through a congressional act called the Smith-Lever Act. And it was this idea that sort of solidified the land-grant university mission, which if you go to land-grant university, these are larger schools, state-funded schools in all of the 50 states. Some states have 2, depending on if you're in the north or in the south. There are pairs of institutions in many southern states that previously were historically black universities. But these are land-grant universities that are focused on agricultural and mechanical arts, so ag and engineering. In the past, they also included military engineering and things like that. You still see that in play at places like Texas A&M, I think. But these institutions were aimed at opening the doors of higher education, getting us away from only having the Harvards and Yales and Princetons of the world, and getting people to learn about science on campus. And there was a lot of teaching at the start. Then there was research that was added on. And somebody eventually sort of figured out, well, we graduate these folks and they go out into their communities, but we find out all these new things after they leave. We don't have a mechanism for teaching that to them. And so the extension service started to be born, where every county and every state would have an extension office, and then these land-grant universities would send information to those offices to teach people. And it was real old-school science communication. There are some really cool pictures, I don't know if you've ever seen them, of people riding trains, and there's like an extension exhibit on the train. So you would pull into town, like I would get off the train in my vest and my bow tie and my top hat, and I would talk about the wonders of insects or something as we did our whistle tour. But that was the kind of genesis of what I think of as science communication for a lot of America. And I always wanted to teach people about insects. It was why I originally got into entomology. I met a lot of really interesting teachers at Purdue when I did my undergrad there, and I just was like, everybody has feelings about insects. Everybody, whether they're good or bad, you can work with them either direction. And so it's a really powerful tool for Sci-Com. But as I kind of went through my schooling, I learned more about extension, and it seemed like a really neat formal opportunity to do Sci-Com. So that's kind of how I got into it, which I think was your original question before I started talking about trains.
No. No, I love tangents. This is that's what podcasting is all
That's
about.
what podcasts are.
Yeah. So that kind of segues into my next question for you, and that is, how did you originally get into entomology in general?
Yeah, I got into entomology through 4-H. 4-H is also an extension program, so I was probably brainwashed. Now, the more I say it out loud, the more I realize. But I'm from central Indiana. I'm from a place called Tipton, Indiana, and we had a 4-H program there. And my family had long done livestock, so I had some uncles that did livestock, and my dad had done lambs and cattle.
Right.
But my dad had a rule that for every animal we entered into the fair, we had to have the corresponding number of projects that would be inside the big building. So the big building is where you see like art projects and sewing and cooking and baking and and canning, all these different kinds of 4-H projects if you've ever been to a fair. And I did art. I did electricity for a couple of years where you make switches. I did rocketry, so I had some model rockets that I built and entered into the fair. But I was kind of running out of things, and I saw entomology in the booklet. And I read through it, and I was like, I've always kind of liked insects. They're interesting, and I catch them in the summer. I bet I could make an insect collection. And you're supposed to go to like a group and get taught how to do it. Yeah. But I decided to be a real autodidact, and I was going to teach myself to make an insect collection. And I read through some of the guidebooks, and I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. I can do it better than that. So I came up with this whole numbering coding system for how I was going to label them. I got rid of all the labels that they provided you, the actual like scientific data labels.
Yeah.
And I went on a catching spree. I was 13 or 14, and so I needed to have about, I think 60 or 70 insects pinned in a collection box. And you're also supposed to make an educational box, so a box that teaches the people that read it about a specific topic in entomology. And I did lampurity. I did a whole thing on fireflies and how they glow.
That's awesome.
And I liked that part. I didn't like the catching the insects part as much. But I was the only entrant, so I won my county fair, and I got to go to the state fair. And I always tell people it's not that impressive when you're the only person, because I got to the state fair and I got raked over the coals.
I mean, it goes on the resume, though.
That's right. That's right. I won my county fair. I was a state fair entrant. I got really busted for not following any of the protocols. But regardless, if you go to the state fair, they used to do this program at Purdue where you got invited to the department for a day, and you got to go to one of the larger lectures. You got to hang out with the people that would be your academic advisor if you chose it as a major. You got to have a lunch with other potential entomology students. It was a really strong recruiting tool that they had employed for a few years, kind of at the early 2000s. And as a result, I was a part of the largest incoming class of freshman entomologists in Purdue's history. There were 11 of us, I think. And it was a lot of fun to get there and start to learn more about insects. But I basically wandered around campus that day and was with my dad and mom, and we saw all these entomologists. We were introduced to grad students. One of the grad students is my good friend and co-host on Arthro-Pod, Jody Green.
Mm-hmm.
She was a graduate student that worked on termites, and she had these 2 termite colonies, and she had fed some of them green paper or blue paper, and the other colony pink paper. And then she would put them together, and they would fight. And you'd watch these little colored termites go after each other.
Wow.
And it was studying the sort of foraging behavior and social and everything. But I just thought, these people are crazy. I want to be a part of this. This is wild. And that was how I got into it. That was one day, basically, after a summer's worth of collecting insects, where I was like, yeah, I think that this is a career path for me. I had wanted to be an author before that, but I saw that I could still write and things like that with entomology. So that's how I ended up here. I got sucked into it through 4-H.
Oh, that's awesome. So then you ended up going to Purdue for your undergrad.
Yep.
And that was in entomology, right?
Yeah. Entomology, I think it's insect science now if you look at the Purdue website.
Mm-hmm.
They've changed the name. But yeah, I was there for 4 years, met my wife, and then got married. And we moved to Kentucky, and that's where I did my doctoral degree. I started as a master's student, but ended up being able to switch about halfway through.
Yeah. So then you got your PhD at University of Kentucky, and that's where you are now teaching, right?
I do extension and teaching, yes.
Teaching
I have
and
an
extension.
80-20 split between those 2 topics.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what was your PhD in? What did you research for that?
I appreciate that question. I'm going to talk about that very often. I worked with Dr. Dan Potter, who is just recently retired in the last couple of years. He is a turfgrass entomologist of some renown. I had always sworn I would never be a corn entomologist or a turfgrass entomologist because I just didn't think that they seemed all that exciting.
Never say never.
Never say never. You never know what's going to happen, what funding shows up when. But I was interested in working with him because he offered me an ecotoxicology project. So I got to look at lawn insecticides and compare their effects on non-targets. At first, I focused on predators. So I looked at ground beetles and spiders and ants and pitfall traps and a few other collection methods. We would also challenge them with prey so I could see sort of non-lethal effects. Like maybe we're still catching ants in these treated areas, but do they still eat armyworm eggs? Do they still eat Japanese beetle larvae that we put out? And after that, I transitioned to working on earthworms. So we looked at decomposition rates in the soil to see if it was impacted. And I ended with pollinators. I studied the effects of lawn insecticides on pollinating insects and if clover and dandelion would absorb lawn insecticides from the soil and create these kind of poisoned patches of flowers throughout the growing season. And we actually came up with a few best management practices. We were able to teach turfgrass applicators. Turf is a huge crop in the United States. I think it's one of the largest unirrigated crop acreages that we have. And there's a lot of insecticides that go out on lawns, golf courses, and sports fields. So finding a way to mitigate any negative effects that they were having on bumblebees and honeybees was one of the highlights of my doctoral work. But then I finished that up, graduated back in 2014, which makes me feel kind of old. And then I was in Nebraska for 5 years after that as an extension educator.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, yeah. So that was one of the things I wanted to cover was extension. So you mentioned the history of extension, but what is it today? Like, what is the role of an extension educator? Because it's a really big field and a really great career for people to go into. So what is like the importance of extension?
I appreciate you saying that because I agree. I think it's an awesome opportunity for a lot of entomologists that I meet nowadays who they talk about Sci-Com very passionately and they clearly have a lot of social justice in their heart. They want to help. That's kind of what extension is, even nowadays compared to its old days. You are working in a field that is all about information equity. You're trying to make sure that everybody has access to information on certain topics. Yeah. And for us, it comes down to pest control in many cases, but also pest avoidance, also sort of medical issues. I've done a lot with red meat allergy and a few other sort of public health things the last couple of years. But if I were to sort of sum up extension, I would say it's a multi-tiered system that starts at the county level in the United States. So in each state, we have a different number of counties depending on where you're at. In many states, each county has an office, and that is the local extension office, where there's usually an agent or an educator, depending on which state you're in. And then those people are kind of the front door to the university. They're there to be the local face, the people that sort of translate the information that comes from campus and gets it out. Above that, you would have specialists, which is what I am now on campus, where you're a certain focus area. So we have entomologists and pathologists. We have family and consumer science specialists. We've got economic specialists. We've got rural internet specialists, because we need to expand access to that. And these are folks that are trying to promote research-based methods in all of these different communities and work together as specialists and agents and assistants to accomplish that.
Yeah. So if someone has like an issue in their crop field, or I don't know, they find a invasive species or something, like with the murder hornets, right? That was a big thing. That's what extension agents would do, is they would go and answer to the sightings of those. So someone has an issue like in their crop field. Is that who they call, or do they call like a company, or what should be their first reaction to that?
Well, I'm going to be very biased and say, yeah, they would want to contact their local extension agent to do that. There are companies now that I would say have privatized the model of extension in many ways. You might hear of things like crop advisors and things that are similar in title to that perform much the same function. But then at the end, they have a product that they're also able to sell to address the needs that's being brought up. But yeah, by and large, it would be great if people in their local community could go to their extension office with any issue that they find. So ag is a big part of extension's history. But as we've modernized, of course, ag has gone from 30% of the American workforce to about 2%. So extension has also had to change and address things like food inequity. We have a lot of urban education, so urban schools that we're contacting, agricultural education, getting people on farms or getting them to raise chicks in their schools. Entomology is a topic that comes up frequently. So we try to touch people's lives in a lot of different ways, but we're also often referred to as the best kept secret in America. People don't know about extension always. Yeah. They haven't been exposed to it. And so I would say, in answer to your question, they don't always know that they can turn to their local extension folks to get that solution.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of interested in what you said about how it's been changing. Like, can you give us some more insight into that? Like, again, like you said, the U.S. used to be a largely agriculture industry. You know, most families, lots of people who have deep roots in the U.S., often their ancestors were farmers, right?
Right.
So how has that kind of been changing with the extension service, and what are some of these newer things that you maybe weren't expecting to have to work through?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I would say that it's a tightrope to walk, because we can't betray our agricultural roots, because the people that still farm, they still really expect a high level of service from an extension office or an extension professional. So on the one hand, you don't want to overserve them, but on the other hand, you can't leave them high and dry either. But there are things that have changed, and so if you look at the typical extension office in Kentucky, for example, there will be at least 2 agents, and one of them will be Ag and Natural Resources. So that's a larger purview than just ag. A lot of them actually focus on forestry. They will focus on water quality and things like that, because those are important things in this state. We have a large forestry industry. We have a lot of different fishing avenues, different streams that people go to, and rivers. And so water also becomes a big issue. The other agent is usually the FCS agent, so Family Consumer Sciences. These are people that teach folks how to cook healthy, are connected to diabetes education. They're connected to sometimes SNAP Ed, different credits that the government gives for providing nutritional options. Sometimes they do provide like recipes and cooking classes and canning classes to help with food deserts and things of that nature. And then in other offices, you'll see a horticulture agent that'll be thrown into the mix. So this is a little different than the past. A horticulture agent is usually aimed at the home horticulture market. So this would be people that have problems with their landscape plants, their backyard garden, people who maybe are pushing into high tunnel agriculture. That often falls to our horticulture agents rather than our A&R agents, because they're growing in kind of a controlled environment rather than in the field. We also have 4-H agents that come into play. 4-H is youth education, so they're in K through 12 schools usually. There's lots of these different avenues, and then from these kind of bases, you get all kinds of branches that pop up. So one of our ag and natural resource agents, for example, he has a local pressure for maple syrup. The maple syrup industry is really strong in Kentucky in his county. And so because of that, he's like in charge of maple syrup education for most of Eastern Kentucky. He hosts the maple syrup event. Yeah, it is cool. He also has a raptor recovery center on site at his extension office. And so again, by default, he's doing some wildlife education to teach people about raptor birds. You could go to a different office and it would be an agent that one of their side hustles that they might have would be cut flowers. So they grow and sell to florists. And then again, that starts to introduce this expertise where they become a local hub and even sort of a semi-statewide hub for cut flower expertise. So I would say we've moved beyond the corn and soybeans and beef, although those are still vital. We still do a lot of education on that. We will tackle almost any topic that pops up in, I guess, agriculture and agriculture adjacent education. I would say I have always felt kind of awkward as an entomologist. My old job in Nebraska, I was an urban entomologist for Omaha. And so that was a recognition that they wanted some expertise to talk about bed bugs and cockroaches and things that are more germane to living in a larger urban area.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, you're seeing some of these be created across the country. It'll be an interesting time for the next maybe 5 to 10 years to see how that switches even further. If we're going to cluster more in urban areas, if we're going to stay in rural areas and forego urban areas, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
You kind of have to go where the people are, but you also have to go where the money is. So, which are you going to pick?
Yeah. So your role at University of Kentucky is a little different in that it's extension and teaching. And your extension is also different, right? Because it's not just urban. Because you said in Nebraska it was more urban entomology. So what is it about the University of Kentucky that's a little different? Like, what's your role more like now?
Yeah, so I'm on campus as a statewide specialist. Before, I was beholden to 2 counties when I was in Nebraska. They happened to be 2 of the most populous counties in that whole state. So there were still a lot of questions and a lot of people. But now with my role as a specialist, this is something that's usually held by somebody with a PhD, and it's usually something that means your main clientele are the extension agents, the people that I used to be a part of. So I produce a lot of materials that I give to them, and then they use those to teach, and then they report numbers back to us. So it's an amplification, sort of a train the trainer setup. The other difference with my job is that there's more responsibility. So I also go out and do a lot of adult education on the road. I'm actually off campus today. I'm in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, Hardin County, at the turf short course. So I work with the green industry mainly here. I work with turf, trees, shrubs. I work with high tunnels. I also work with public health pests, and I'm forgetting something, but I have a larger purview than I used to have. And so I speak at some of these professional meetings as well, where continuing education is happening to give research updates or just to educate on invasive species and new hot button topics that are coming up. So I would say it's bigger, but it's also a different set of clientele in some ways, where I want to focus my time on teaching extension agents about spotted lanternfly, for example, so they feel prepared to educate their home communities about it.
Oh, that's really cool. So your role is 80% extension, right? And then 20%, are you teaching courses to students as well, or is it mostly extension?
I am mostly extension, but then when I'm on campus teaching, I have, I guess maybe I'm more like 15%. I have a few different classes that I've picked up over the years. Some of them are 1 credit hour seminars for our graduate students
Okay.
specifically. One of them is called delusory parasitosis.
Nice.
So we
That's
teach
cool.
students about delusions of infestation and help to prepare them for encountering folks that may be suffering from that. I assume you've spoken about this phenomenon on the show
I
before?
Yeah, it's crazy. I did interview one person who is studying delusory delusional parasitosis, and is really interesting. And the time that I spoke with her was the first time I had ever heard of it. So it's crazy that there's a whole seminar that you're teaching just on that. I mean, it seemed like a really small niche kind of thing. So that's really cool. So is that like once a week or?
Yes, we meet 15 times with that class, and it's half lecture, but also half experiential. So the way that we fill in some of the time, because you're right, it's not something that you could probably give 15 1-hour lectures on, but you can give about 6 or 7 lectures about different avenues that it takes. So how it presents normally, how it's associated with bed bugs, how it's associated with mites, some things like that. But the experiential part for us is the co-teacher and I, so Zach DeVries, our urban entomologist, and I, we put this together as a team. And one of his ideas was, okay, well, we've all got cases that we've saved up. So every other week they do case studies. We have about 3
Wow.
students that get assigned real emails or voicemails that we've received. And we blot out all the personal information so that nobody is getting exposed or anything like that. But we share it with the students and say, okay, how would you respond to this? And they actually build an email response, or they'll present a response. And we all talk about, are they providing enough sympathy and empathy? Did they help this person? It's a way of trying to get used to it before you actually have it happen to you the first time in your career. So we teach that every other year thereabout. I teach an extension methods class. So how to make a podcast, how to make videos, how to write a fact sheet, how to perform some of these different extension tools that we use. And then this last semester I picked up cultural entomology, which was a real fun time. I co-teach that with Tanja Fisher on our campus. I do a lot with asynchronous education. So that one's actually one of our online courses. We have our online master's degree, one of 3 institutions after Nebraska and Florida that have an online master's. And we try to provide asynchronous options where people can log in and take those courses on their own time. Cultural entomology is part of that. Last semester, I also helped build immature insects as an online asynchronous course. So it's all about identifying larvae and nymphs of insects through dichotomous keys.
Mm-hmm.
And then my big class is integrated pest management, and I've taught that 2 or 3 times now, which is all focused on how we perform the task of integrated pest management in agriculture, in horticulture, in urban settings, and getting people to think differently about how they approach pest control.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it's really awesome, and like you mentioned, there's a online graduate degree or master's degree that UF, UK, and Nebraska all have, and that's a really cool thing that such a small field like entomology would have an option like that for people. So yeah, it's really cool that you're contributing to that. It's really exciting.
I find it a lot of fun. I actually have 3 or 4 online master students at any point that I kind of advise. I've graduated 2 of them. I really love it because as an extension professional, I'm on the road a lot. I don't have the opportunity to apply for a lot of grant funding the way my research colleagues do. And so having these online students who they are building projects that are more extension adjacent. So we look at different social media types of posting. One of my grad students is working on how extension should better build videos on Facebook and Instagram. We have had people build citizen science courses. It fits with my style and career, I think, a little bit better than having somebody that's doing really hardcore genetic research or something in the lab.
Yeah.
And it's more within my budget. So I really love our online program, and I want to contribute to it any way I can.
Yeah, that's really really cool. All right, yeah. So your podcast, I want to talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
So like I mentioned, like we talked about a minute ago, you've been doing it for a while. What was kind of like I know you mentioned that you were kind of pushed into it, I guess. But what has been the journey throughout it and like the overall reception of it? Some interesting things that you found.
That's an interesting question. I like the way that you phrase that. So when I first started, I found that there were people that were sort of suspect of it, I guess, within Extension because they thought that it wouldn't be research based or that it wouldn't be the same as like a fact sheet. And I've stressed over the years that a podcast is as accurate and factual as you make it. And if I base all of what we say off of Extension fact sheets and research publications, if we have fellow professionals such as yourself and other faculty members or what have you on the podcast, they're speaking from an area of expertise. It is not a form of lowbrow education. It's an opportunity to connect with people in a different way. And to me, having passive extension like this that exists on people's own time and is very evergreen, I think is a great way of connecting with folks through the magic rectangles that live in all our pockets, right?
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity. And at first, I encountered some pushback from administrators and others that were sort of centered along those lines. Like, this isn't very academic. But that's melted away for the most part as time has gone on. I think people have seen how videos and podcasts and all that have really opened up the world. And I would say the biggest challenges have just been, at first it was very hard. I was alone. I did it on my own for the first few episodes.
Yeah.
And I had these like monologues that I would try to deliver. I don't know how people do it. Like what's your favorite podcast that's one person? It's a hard question.
Yeah, I can't even think of one. Like,
so I'll be honest. When I was doing it originally, I don't know if you ever listened to Hardcore History by Dan Carlin.
I don't think so.
Okay, he's like an original podcaster. He goes way back, and he produces these podcasts that, honest to goodness, they're like 7 to 10 hours long, and he reads a thing. And you would think it'd be boring, but he's got this really interesting voice, and he talks about crazy historical topics. And at first I was like, okay, so that's what a podcast is. It's one person communicating a story. But I quickly sort of figured out, I was like, I can't do that. Like, I'm not going to be able to accomplish this. And that was when I started interviewing guests, because it's a lot of fun to meet new people, as you have learned over the years.
Yeah.
And then after a while, I wanted to do something different, and I came up with Arthro-Pod 2.0, which is when Jody and Mike joined the show. So Jody Green of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Michael Scavarla at Penn State. They're both extension professionals as well. They'd both been on the show. They knew how it worked. Jody and I were in the same state at the time, and I really wanted to do it with them because I also felt like we all three represented different parts of entomology. Like, I was very applied and very horticultural.
Yeah.
Jody was very applied and urban. And then Mike is very basic and very focused on genomics and taxonomy and all that. So I thought we were kind of like a triforce. Like, we could merge together and create a cool show. And we all know different people that we could then invite on as guests. And I have felt that it's been a great success. So I've been very happy. We just keep chugging along. We've got an episode, I think, that'll come out here in the near future, or maybe the near past when this comes out, but it'll be Jody talking about multicolored lady beetles. And it was a lot of fun to make. And before that, we had Flukers, the cricket farm people on. So it's just cool. It's just fun. You know how it is. You make these audio things for people to listen to, and
it's very
you feel a sense
fun.
of accomplishment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what is kind of exciting to me is all of these bug podcasts so far are just passionate people who really like doing it because they like doing it. I mean, I don't know about you, but like, I haven't made any money, so it's like,
right.
it's a passion project for all of us. So yeah, it's really exciting. Like, all of these people that are doing this are obviously very passionate about it, and that's kind of like the only reason we're doing it, right? So,
Yes.
um,
You're
yeah,
not going
so
to
it's
get
just
rich
really
off
cool.
this. You're not
Yeah.
going to get super famous off of it.
If I crack the code on that, I'll let you know.
I appreciate that. I would appreciate some tips and tricks. It's just a great way of sort of talking within our science, but also exposing more people to our science, I feel like.
Mhm.
And I guess I feel I look like I have really bright silver hair. I promise I do have some color to my hair. I'm not quite that old yet, but having done this for about 11 years now, one of the cool things for me is seeing shows like you and There Will Be Bugs and Bugs Need Heroes
Mhm.
and all those kinds of shows that are coming up.
Yeah.
They just you're a part of a different modus operandi where we come from it at this extension angle. The Sci-Com revolution that's happened in entomology, which I feel kind of came out of extension, but is moving in all these really neat ways. Like you're doing the things that we need to do within entomology and within extension to keep science and facts and things like that alive. So to me, that's one of the cool. You sort of asked the path that I had seen with podcasting.
Yeah.
I think that's the neat thing to me is to see all these new ones coming out, and they don't pod fade. They stick with it, and they get passionate about it, and they get cool microphones like yours and stick with it, and you just keep changing the way that people approach this topic of how are we going to teach people about insects. And while podcasting may not seem the first most obvious solution,
Yeah.
since insects are a very visual medium to communicate
Right.
with,
Yeah.
we're relying on audio here. There's still so much that you can do. I mean, I have no doubt you've uncovered this right over as you go, like insect sounds, just having experts on. There's all these different ways that we can do it, and I feel like it's an honor to see people like yourself moving everything forward as we continue to go into the podcast medium and see it almost move to video, right? That's the other part. You're going to release this with both.
Yeah.
We've seen that change as well too. So I love it. It does make me feel old, but I love it.
Well, I appreciate all of your kind words, and I mean, again, I'm just going to echo that. Like, it's a really exciting time to be alive, to see this sort of shift happen, because I think for a long time it was, bugs are weird. Why would you why would you go to school for that? What's the career path with that? I'm sure lots of people have heard that. And I'm sort of starting to see this shift where people are like, oh no, bugs are actually pretty cool, right?
Yep.
And I think it even goes both ways, because I think people are inherently interested in what they are either weirded out by or curious by, or maybe they just don't know enough about insects, and so they're intrigued, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the cool things about podcasts. I sort of alluded to this before, but it is this, if you set your show up, your feed right, it can be fairly evergreen. Like these can be things that people find on their own time, and you never know what is going to speak to somebody
Right.
like when you are ready, the master will appear. And I feel like that happens with podcasts frequently. Somebody listens to your show, and it just happened to be the thing that they needed at that time to know, maybe I will think about that as a graduate degree, or maybe I will think about doing that for my undergrad, or I see what this insect means now. It's revelatory to them. And the other part is we're not just doing insects, right? Like this is all foundational to science
Right.
belief, I think. Like making sure that we are a part of the cultural conversation in a platform that matters to most humans in our nation right now is important.
Yeah.
Like if I was just writing fact sheets and publishing things on our departmental website,
Right.
yeah, who's going to find that? Who's going to look at that? But a podcast, that's a little different. And your video channel and all that, like that's where people are. That's what people are doing now. So we have to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot more personal, right? So if you have this long form content, it's a lot more personal than if you were just to throw up facts online, right?
Yes.
And if they listen, they get those facts along the way anyway, right? In a much more personal way. So I think it's a really important thing. And to see that yeah, there are people behind the research and the science that happens, right? These things
Yes.
don't just happen, right?
Yeah. It contextualizes things, but I think you're hitting on a big piece, the humanization of it. This
Mm-hmm.
could easily just be, somebody reading about grasshoppers, but if they see your show or listen to your show and they hear a grasshopper expert going on about how passionate they are and why they're passionate about it,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, scientists are not stuffy weirdos. They can also be like this lady, this grasshopper expert that loves what they do and really is passionate about it. And it opens new avenues for folks. So I don't want to puff us up too much, Brandon, but Braden, but
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a very exciting thing that's happening, and I've talked about this. I think one other time where I think in like probably the early 1900s, being a naturalist was a very common thing, right? So birding was a much more common thing. Curating an insect collection was a much more common thing. You see those very, very old insect collections, and they're just immaculately
right,
curated, right? Especially in the UK and Europe, I would say, is like where that was a big thing. So you've got a lot of very old insect collections, and it seemed like, oh yeah, and then like science illustration, right, was a big thing as well, and all mostly hobbies, which makes sense, but you kind of saw a shift away from that in history. Most people switched to whatever else, right? Naturalism wasn't seen as a maybe not as important or less prominent thing, and now I'm kind of starting to see it come back, right? Oh my gosh, a lot more people are starting to, take photos of wildlife, start doing wildlife photography, and curate their own insect collections, keep more insects as pets, right? Yeah, I'm seeing this shift, and I think it might be to do with the internet, right? So you're able to look up what this bug is or what this plant is, or you see these cool videos on Instagram about this cool bug that someone else found, or there's iNaturalist where you can basically do real life Pokemon and like share what you found where, right?
yes,
It's just a really cool sort of shift that I'm seeing, and I think it's partly to do with the internet.
I would 100% agree with that. I think that you're tapping into, in the past, those people that did that, they were a part of a club or a local group of autodidacts or what have you that would hang
Yeah.
out and that was their community. And then communities get stripped away every now and then, sociologically speaking. And, we had everybody moving into towns and doing factory work. I don't want to grossly oversimplify the Industrial Revolution and
Right. Yeah.
the suburbanification of America, but yeah, a lot of that was sort of washed away, and those types of naturalist clubs didn't pop back up. But I think what you're talking about is a lot of communities being built. People find one another on iNaturalist, on Reddit. There's people that are there's a second job that they're unpaid for that do all kinds of insect identification on what's this bug and all that stuff on Reddit. But they find each other, right? You find your people, your club, and
Yeah.
you feel a little more whole because of that. And it is because of the internet. And I hate to see those things get chipped away at as things get privatized and what have you. But that's the way of the world in some ways. I won't get political on Maine with you.
No, yeah, I mean, science, I think, is inherently political, right? You're only going to be able to do research on things that has funding, right? That's kind of what I've been learning recently. So yeah, I would say science is heavily influenced by politics, like many other things are. So yeah, it's interesting to think about for sure.
I agree. There's a lot to unpack there.
Mhm.
Maybe not for us to do today.
Yeah. Maybe that's another episode. But Yeah, so extension and um, teaching, and I was kind of curious, what is like your big, what are some like big plans for the future? Like, what's ahead for you? Like, do you want to just keep doing this forever, or more? Do you want to do any research or other teaching things you want to experiment with, or mediums, or like what are
Yeah,
your big aspirations for the future?
cool. I would love to talk about that.
Hmm.
So, in terms of podcasting, I don't see it going away anytime soon. I do love hanging out with Jody and Mike
Hmm.
and making our show. So, I think that'll keep going for the foreseen future. There have been some conversations with, so I've got a teammate here. His name is Blake Newton, and he's my youth outreach specialist. So, he focuses a lot on 4 H education. And we've talked about re-energizing some of the website literature that we have for youth and trying to make it more approachable for them, because right now it feels very like 2007 if you kind of browse through it online,
Yeah.
and we would like people to go get back to it and use it more. So what that looks like, I will say that for the last couple of years I've had an intern every summer that is focused on our TikTok channel. I don't promote it very much, our Kentucky Bugs TikTok channel, because I'm not supposed to have a TikTok channel as a member of a university,
Okay.
but different universities, I should say. But
Hmm.
I have dabbled in that kind of social media space because it seems important to me. It seems important to figure out how to translate things into that shorter version and how to maximize your appearance in an algorithm like that.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued by all that kind of stuff. I have a graduate student working on an online master's student working on some of that. So I might go more that direction. But I'm interested in, I guess, maybe getting some more hard data on things like podcasts. So what have our podcasts meant to people? What do those numbers on the screen that tell you the downloads and listens, like what does that
Mm.
translate to on the other side? We get these sort of anecdotal stories through email at Arthro-Pod where people say, you know, I joined the University of Nebraska Lincoln online master's program because of this show, or
Wow.
I decided to do an undergrad in entomology because of this episode. And
Whoa.
well, yeah, like
That's a big deal.
it does. It feels really
Yeah.
big, but it's also like, how is there any way for me to capture that more so I can prove, I guess, in a way, the efficacy of this medium? I think that's something that I'd like to figure out more. But I think I might need to make some friends in the social sciences. Do you have any contacts, Braden?
You know, it's interesting you say that. I don't have any contacts, but that's something I've been interested in exploring a lot more, is not only like just with podcasts, but also people, like data on people's view of entomology, or like insects in general, right?
Yeah.
So more, I would be interested in seeing if there's more data on um, like how many entomologists there actually are. I've heard the going number is about 8,000 worldwide entomologists, which is
Wow.
not very many.
I was gonna say I hadn't heard that. That we were
Yeah,
part of a small select group.
yeah, that's really not very many. I'd like to see what like the average public person, like member of the public, what their view is on insects, their importance. Like, how much do you value the the importance of bugs? How much do you value the um, importance of like bees versus native bee, like honeybees versus native bees, right? I
Right.
think that's a big kind of misconception. Everyone says like save the bees, and no one really knows what that means, right? Do we mean honeybees? Do we mean native bees? Um, that's a big topic of conversation. Like, um, yeah, so I would be really interested in collecting data on like how well educated the public is on insects, because even in high school and college biology, you get like one chapter on arthropods,
Right.
um, not on insects, right?
Right.
So, most people know almost nothing about insects, which are the most diverse animal group on the planet by far. So it's kind of it blows my mind to think about
Yep.
that. Um,
They know they
and
don't like them, but they
right,
usually know that much.
yeah. That's what I'm saying. So like, I'd be interested to see um, if they're. I'm also kind of interested in seeing if we could get to the bottom of like where that viewpoint comes from. And my theory is that it's highly taught, right? It's
Right.
a cultural thing where like, ew, bugs are weird, right? Or
Right.
they're gross, or they freak me out, or I'm scared of them, or whatever. Um, I'm probably a weirdo in that I've never been scared of bugs, not even spiders. So maybe that's why I'm interested in seeing like why people think that way.
It's an interesting debate, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and then also like, my podcast is part of my nonprofit organization, so that could be a really interesting thing to show for, like fundraising and stuff like that. Like, yes, there is a need for this, and I think it's a weird dilemma in that lots of people are afraid of bugs, but they can't look away from like a video about like a creepy
Right.
bug or something,
Right.
right? So it's like horror movies in that sense, in that lots of the viewers on maybe the podcast or like YouTube um, are going to be actually freaked out by bugs, but they just are curious about it, right? And that's
Sure.
where that's where it starts, I think. So
That's the worm.
hmm
I like a lot what you're saying there. I do wonder sometimes about that fear as well. I will say I did some master gardener training. If you've never heard of master gardeners, these are adult volunteers that work at extension offices usually. They take like 20 or 40 hours of education, and then they give 20 or 40 hours of volunteer work usually to that local community. And I was teaching in this one county in Kentucky, and one of the master gardener students came up, and I had just talked about, some people say there's a born fear within humans that we are the descendants of people that didn't get killed by specific insects or venomous arthropods. And so those genes were passed on to create almost evolutionary psychology that informs our feelings about them. Other people say it's completely learned. That if you put a bunch of Hercules beetles around 3-year-olds, they're going to be curious more than freaked out at first.
Yeah.
Just like that video with the snakes that went around recently.
yeah,
Yeah. And this person came up afterwards and said, or during the break, and said, it's completely innate. She said, she was very adamant. This is something that's genetic. It's born within us. She said that she had these experiences where nobody had ever talked to her about spiders, but the first time she saw a spider, she instantly jumped away from it like 3 feet backwards. And so it's very nuanced. I don't know that we'll ever get to the center of the Tootsie Pop on that one
That's
and really know
Yeah.
what happens. But I do think it's a little bit of A, a little bit of B. I have seen it happen, like what you're talking about. I've always believed it's taught that, I'm in line at the great insect fair at Penn State, or I'm at the Bug Bowl at Purdue or whatever. I'm holding a tomato hornworm caterpillar, and a 5-year-old kid comes up and wants to pet the caterpillar. Their mom slaps their hand and says, "That's dirty. Don't touch that." And then that kid for the rest of their life is going to have this preconceived notion. And you see it happen kind of in real time where the
Yeah.
fear or the hatred is born. So I don't know, one or the other, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I don't know, because there's also a big divide between like spiders and cockroaches and stuff versus butterflies and bees. Right?
Right.
Even bees, a lot of people like bees, right?
Yep.
And they can sting you. So
Right. They like the front end at least.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think about, but yeah, is there anything else you wanted to cover? I think we covered just about all of it.
Cool. Yeah, as long as we got through what you wanted to talk about, I was excited for the opportunity. Like I said, it fills my heart with joy that there's so many podcasts about bugs that are coming out now, and I hope there's more and more and more. I feel like the space is wide open, and anybody that wants to can do it. It takes some time and effort and energy, as you well know, to record and edit and promote. I've seen you hustle at ESA, How many people you had a line around the block at one show that I saw you at. So don't be thinking this is easy town. This takes a lot of work for people to put together. But if you are interested, I think anybody else that's listening, if you wanted to start a bug podcast, you could.
Yeah, go for it. And it's really a collaborative thing. I don't see those other bug podcasts as like competition in any
Exactly.
way.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're a big team. We're a small discipline. So like we need to, like I said, 7,000, 8,000 people. We need to stick together, right?
That's right.
So
we have an aggregation pheromone, so we can all
exactly,
together.
Exactly, yeah.
I have thought about an entomology podcast network sometime in the future, but I don't know how we would how all that would work and if it would need an incorporation like you've got. But
that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah. Something to help us all promote each other to get out there, because we all have different flavors.
Like a label or something, like a record label or something.
I like that.
Yeah.
That sounds cooler.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the show. This was super nice to finally sit down with you and get to know you a little better. You know, we've talked several times at ESA in the past couple of years, but never had like a real talk about yeah but yeah, thanks so much again. This was super fun.
I appreciate it.